That's fine. The 1960s, according to this website, and according to most, was known as the era of civil rights and turmoil. Certainly you will remember all of that. The first event I want to remind you of is on July the 4th in 1960, the 50-star flag of the U.S. debuted in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It reflected the admission of Hawaii to the Union in 1959. Alaska had been admitted just prior to that. The reason I remember that is because I was growing up in Texas, and all of a sudden we were no longer the biggest state in the Union. So, we always did then and probably still do now hope that some of Alaska would melt. Nothing personal. I like a lot of people up there. In November of 1960, Senator John F. Kennedy became President of the United States. Mr. Kennedy was a Democrat. I'd like to ask you folks to ask yourselves a question. Would the Democrat of today express the same opinion and the same direction that Mr. Kennedy is very famous for having said? He said, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." I would submit to you that today's Democrat has turned that exactly backwards. That leads to a problem. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. That's how we all get ahead. That's what I grew up with. That's what a lot of people grew up with. That's what a lot of people in the Tea Party grew up with. We want to know what we can do for our country, and that's what they're doing. And you 16 to 26-year-olds need to learn that. You need to help us with that. Okay? 1961, the Berlin Wall was constructed. Can you believe that? 16 years after the war ended, the Berlin Wall was constructed. That wasn't right. February of 62, Kennedy admitted that the military advisors already in Vietnam would engage the enemy if fired upon. 62. October of 62, James Meredith entered the University of Mississippi as the first black student at a major university. Wow. Think about that. There's a lot of people on this earth, a lot of people fighting for the good of this country that remember that happening. And they remember, and I'll tell you what, they remember that it's a very good thing. I guess I should add that. They remember that it's a very good thing. And I'll give you, I graduated from high school in May of 1963. So we just hit October of 62. I'm pretty well focused on what's going on in my life as a high school senior, and I'm about to enter the Naval Academy, which has been a 6-year dream and fight. And I reported to Navy about 10 days after I graduated from high school. So in June of 63, I went in. I was fortunate enough to be a yell leader at Navy. I was fortunate enough to be good friends with Roger Staubach the year that he won the Heisman Trophy. That was my freshman year at Navy. And so it was, I was 18 years old. 18 years old. And I was right where I thought I was supposed to be. Well, in August of 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. made his speech of I Have a Dream at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington. And as you know, November the 22nd, 1963, John F. Kennedy was shot in Dallas, Texas. I'll never, ever forget that. And there's a lot of people fighting for this country that won't forget it either. That was not a good thing. That was the first time since World War II. Now, see, this is how you... That was the first time since World War II that the Army-Navy game was postponed for a week because Mr. Kennedy was assassinated. I was coming back from my fourth period class trying to make, muster for lunch at the academy when they made the announcement. Man, kind of like what 9/11 did to some folks. In August of 64, the summer after my freshman year in college, the Gulf of Tonkin happened, and we were very officially and very heavily engaged in Vietnam. In the August of 65, the Voting Rights Act of 65 was signed into law by then President Lyndon B. Johnson. And I'd like for you to note there were two significant pieces to that legislation. One of them, think about this, they outlawed the requirement of potential voters to take a literacy test. Think about that. Up until 1965, a voter in the United States needed to be able to read. That's not the case anymore. The second one was that the provision of federal registration of voters in areas with less than 50% of voters, of registered voters, was no longer required. In October of 65 was the first public burning of a draft card as a protest of Vietnam. In November of 1966, the first black United States senator in 85 years, Honorable Mr. Edward Brooke, was elected to Congress. Brooke was a Republican. In July of 67, black riots broke out all across the United States. In the summer of 1967, I got caught in one of those black riots. I was working. I was a traveling salesman calling on one of my customers in, of all places, Topeka, Kansas. And I heard what sounded like a huge storm outside the hotel where I was staying. I thought I had been caught up in one of these world famous Kansas twisters. So I went to the window and realized I was in a different kind of Kansas twister. I was in the middle of a race riot. Luckily, that's as close as it got to me was the sound. But it certainly had a long-reaching impact. In October of 67, Thurgood Marshall was sworn in as the first black Supreme Court justice. This is not history to a lot of people. This is life. That was followed in 1968 in April of the assassination of Martin Luther King. And that was quickly followed in June with the assassination of presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's younger brother. So that's 1968, folks. That's less than 5 years after I was 18 years old, starting at the Naval Academy. I didn't tell you earlier why I wanted to go to Navy. I wanted to go to Navy because I wanted to be a senator from the state of Texas. And I thought that the Naval Academy would be excellent training to be in that kind of a leadership role. I was right, I think. I learned a lot. But right there in that short span of time, you've had JFK, three major leaders in our society of the time. John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. all shot. Needless to say, I started giving some serious thought to my career choices. The last couple of events that occurred in 1969, yeah, this is kind of funny. November of 1969, the internet, at the time called the ARPANET, was seeing its initial development. It was invented by the Advanced Research Projects Agency in the United States Department of Defense. As most of you know, the Department of Defense is responsible for funding a lot of the technology that private enterprise, free enterprise, then takes to market and figures out how to make a buck off of it. So we're coming up on our 42, 43 minute mark. I try to close these out right under the 45 minute mark. So that took us through the 60s. Next week, I'm probably going to continue to go forward through the 70s because I'm not trying to bore you with at all with. I'm trying to give everybody some perspective, give my generation some perspective, helping you think back through, and give the youths a perspective of why we feel so strongly at this point in time of turning over a better United States to you than it appears we're going to be able to if folks continue taking the direction that they're taking, and that is spending money that they don't have, flaunting, ignoring, or pushing the limits of the Constitution, which was absolutely not written to be a changeable, modifiable document as we go along. It was probably the absolute greatest thing ever written, and that's what it was the basis for the wonderful country that we are fighting for, that we still have, and that an awful lot of the rest of the world wants to take down out of sheer jealousy and their inability to do it themselves. So I'm going to close out with another little 25-second piece, and then I will say goodnight. So take a listen to this, if you will. You can find that one in The Calling. This is Doc Owen. It's been a pleasure having you this evening. I'll look forward to our next conversation. Hopefully we'll have the phones working. Remember, find a tea party.